Good morning. It's Tuesday the 2nd of January here in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Iran dispatches a warship to the Red Sea as the US sinks Houthi boats and tensions flare.
Rishi Sunak talks up a reduction in small boat migration, but experts warn the decline could be temporary.
Plus, not shooting for the stars, the UK struggles to get its space superpower ambitions out of low orbit.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Iran has sent a warship to the Red Sea in a marked escalation of tensions in the region. The show of force comes after the US Navy destroyed 3 Houthi boats which were attempting to board a container ship on New Year's Day. A spokesperson for Iran's foreign ministry says the West has made the area less secure.
Activities by the US and Britain in the Red Sea are in line with the role of those two countries and intensifying instability and insecurity in the regional waters, especially in the Red Sea. Such moves will not help the region's stability and security at all. Their acts will raise regional and international concern about the security of the region.
A spokesman there speaking through a translator saying that Iran has a legal right to respond to Israel's recent killing of an Iranian general in Syria. For its part, Israel's military is pulling several thousand troops out of Gaza to focus on targeted strikes. It says it's entering a new phase of the war and reorientating its forces to both boost the economy and focus on a threat from Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Meanwhile, Israel's Supreme Court has overturned a highly contested law aimed at weakening the power of the judiciary. In an 8-7 ruling, the court struck down a law passed in July that would have barred judges from voiding government decisions for being, quote, unreasonable. The move is a blow to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing coalition in Israel. The plan had split the nation and triggered mass protests from opponents who said that it would have eroded the country's democracy by giving the government too much power.
Bloomberg has learned of further US efforts to slow Beijing's drive to build its own semiconductor industry. According to sources, the chip equipment maker ASML cancelled some shipments to China weeks ahead of a January deadline following a request from the US. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
ASML Holding has cancelled shipments of some of its machines to China at the Biden request. This week's before the export bans on the high-end chip making came into effect. The Dutch manufacturer had licenses to ship 3 top-of-the-line deep ultraviolet lithography machines, but before the deadline, it decided to cancel the orders. The U.S. and allies have been trying to block access to the technology. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
China's President Xi Jinping has pledged to strengthen the country's economic recovery. The leader talked of setbacks in his New Year's Eve address.
On the road ahead, wind and rain are normal. Some enterprises are facing operational pressure, and some people are encountering difficulties in employment and life. And natural disasters such as floods, typhoons, and earthquakes have occurred in some places, all of which I'm deeply concerned. We are not afraid of hardships. We will watch out for each other, face up to the challenges, and overcome the difficulties.
The rare mention of difficulties from China's president comes as the latest set of PMI surveys painted a contrasting picture of the country's manufacturing sector. The private Caixin index showed factory activity picking up in November, while official data published at the weekend pointed to a contraction in December. Xi also used his address to re-emphasise his pledge to reunify China with Taiwan, just weeks before voters on the island go to the polls to pick their next president.
At least 30 people have died in Japan after a major earthquake hit the country's northwest coast. The quake triggered a fire which destroyed more than 100 houses and buildings in the city of Wajima. Aid workers are continuing to search for victims amidst aftershocks. Dean Nankivel, a former international search and rescue manager, says it's important these teams act quickly.
Obviously, it's only a finite time. You can't spend days and days waiting for that information. If you're going to rescue people, you need to get on the ground very, very quickly, get your teams into their locations and start effecting those rescues as soon as you possibly can.
Nankivel's comments come after a tsunami warning for most of the Sea of Japan coast was lifted this morning. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has set up a task force to help the rescue and repair operations.
Rishi Sunak says the UK is making progress on limiting illegal migration into the country. The Prime Minister's statement came alongside Home Office figures released on Monday, showing the number of migrant crossings on the English Channel in small boats dropped by 36% last year. That's the first decline in at least 5 years. Cracking down on illegal migration has been a central issue for the Conservative government. Speaking last month, Sunak said that he is determined to work on the issue.
We're very clear we want to stop the boats. I want to tackle this problem. They're already down by a third. We've got more to do. The Conservative Party is united in wanting to stopping the boats.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak speaking last year. Despite the recent figures, an official from the Immigration Services Union warned that, quote, higher numbers of migrants are expected in 2024, as last year's crossings were likely affected by high winds over the Channel in December.
Elon Musk's X is now worth less than a third of the $44 billion he paid for the company, formerly known as Twitter. According to Axios, disclosures by the investment company Fidelity show the decline in value. The reports say Fidelity cut the value of its holding in X by a further 11% as of November, extending a series of markdowns of the platform. The news comes after X struggled to attract advertisers last year following controversial comments from owner Musk. Now, in a moment, we'll tell you while Britain's race to become a space superpower isn't taking off. But first, a quick look at today's Bloomberg Big Take report. Almost everything Wall Street expects in 2024. So famously, some of the biggest names on Wall Street didn't get their 2023 predictions right. Bloomberg has gone through 650 calls made by banks, advisors, asset managers about what they're expecting from 2024. Now, most of the consensus among those 650 calls are things like a benign economic slowdown, interest rates finally starting to bite, that central bank pivot, of course, we've been waiting for as well, setting the stage for a late year rebound in markets. A pretty middle of the road scenario.
And that's sort of the problem, because so many people got the predictions for 23 wrong. The issue is, does Wall Street get it wrong this time? And if so, what are the outliers? On balance, according to our analysis, they lean a little bit bearish. But look, you can check out this really comprehensive guide. I mean, we've given you just the top line details because you get a drop down menu, all of the institutions listed. You can read a mini paragraph that summarises all of their views by different asset classes, by different themes. They talk about interest rates, about volatility, and you can also search using common terms, throughout all of these investment guides for 2024 and the year ahead.
Yeah, fascinating reads this morning. Bloomberg's Big Take, NI Big Take is the function on the terminal. Of course, you'll find it on the website as well. Now, Iran has sent a warship, the Alborz, to the Red Sea in response to the US Navy's sinking of 3 Houthi boats over the weekend, the latest escalation of tensions in that region. Joining us now to discuss, Bloomberg's managing editor for economy and government news in the Middle East and Africa, Sylvia Westall, is with us. Sylvia, great to have you on the programme. What has happened then with these Houthi attacks and the response from US warships?
So I think what we are seeing now is these escalating attacks by the Houthi group, which is backed by Iran. They're based in Yemen, but they say that they are acting on behalf of the Palestinians in the Israel-Hamas war. So, it's a moment in which when regional tensions ratchet up with, involving Iran, this is something that happens through this sort of proxy group. And the US has said it will work to protect shipping. This has happened a few times in the past, and the US has sent military vessels into these waterways of the region. The difficulty is always that the US wants to show it's present and protect shipping, but sometimes just by simply being there in a greater amount, this actually raises the risk of things spiraling into a bigger conflict. So I think, there was this incident in which several Houthi fighters were killed by the US over the weekend and that meant that these tensions have ratcheted up further. So I think the timing of this warship from Iran being sent there, it's quite small, but it's coming at a time of heightened tensions. So the risk is that even a small incident could tip into something larger.
Okay. So there are then concerns about this. I mean, how much can the waterway be kept open? This is obviously a hugely important area for shipping, and the US has organised this sort of convoy to try to work together to keep the waterway open. How much is that possible then, as you say, given that the tensions are increasing in the Red Sea?
Well, I think, it's up to global shipping companies whether they want to take this route. It's not closed. It's there. It's open. So I just think, global shipping companies are weighing up the risk of traveling through there. Obviously, it's much faster to go that way. And if you go an alternative route that's much further around Africa, it raises shipping costs. At the moment, it seems that most major shipping companies, and we've seen, data that shows that they are choosing to take the longer route because it's a lower risk one. As soon as sort of tensions, ease, and as soon as there's a clearer picture, then I think, ships will go through the shorter route. So it's really up to these sort of global shippers to sort of assess whether they want to take the higher risk, quicker route, which is cheaper, or take the lower risk, longer route right now.
Sylvia, of course, the backdrop to this is the ongoing Israel-Hamas war and some shift in strategy from Israel we've heard about over the weekend.
That's right. So Israel says it's pulling out some brigades from Gaza from its ground invasion. Of course, there are still sort of air operations going on. It does look like it's a new phase in the war after, a lot of international pressure on Israel to draw back. It was something that was expected in the coming weeks. Although, also because of domestic pressures, it's quite difficult for Israel to say things are over. And it was always very difficult for them to draw a line under it because their aim was to completely eradicate Hamas in Gaza. It's not really clear how that can be done easily unless they can kind of claim, killing members of the top leadership, which, they haven't done to this point right now. So I think, it was always going to be quite unclear when this would end. And it looks like this is sort of a phased drawback, at least of the ground operations, although it is still going on. It's not the end of the war for now.
Sylvia, thank you so much for being with us. Bloomberg's managing editor for economy and government news in the Middle East and Africa, Sylvia Westall.
Let's turn to a different story now, though. Britain's push to become a space superpower being undermined by political disarray, a weak domestic investment, while showing that the country needs international partners more than ever post-Brexit. In 2023, Britain's top satellite operators, Inmarsat and OneWeb, were absorbed by overseas rivals who are bulking up against Elon Musk's fast-growing Starlink. Among the most high-profile projects to launch rockets into space have been sidelined by bankruptcy or delays. Well, we've got our tech reporter Tom Seal with us for more on this story. Tom, good morning to you. There have been high hopes for the UK space sector. What is the potential for this area?
Hi, good morning. Yeah, it's a boom time in space investment from a historical perspective, and there's been a huge wave of increasing commercialization of space. And the UK, along with other parts of the world, have sought to tap into this. Particularly Boris Johnson, 2 prime ministers ago now, really made a big deal about this and bought a satellite company out of bankruptcy, talked about Galactic Britain. And so I've been following this very closely and thought it was a really interesting case study in how Britain can sort of try to manage and, employ industrial strategy.
Yeah, so then after this year and a lot of focus in 23 on this issue, what is holding it back for Britain?
I think it's something that you might see across lots of industries, political disarray. We've had, these multiple administrations which don't seem to last very long. Even within those administrations, there are frequent reshuffles. There's been a change in the machinery of government, as they call it, with a new science department. So policies kind of chop and change. Civil servants aren't necessarily incentivized to carry things through. And so things like a space council, which was a bit like a Trump space force that was started by Boris Johnson, was then cancelled by Liz Truss. It was then brought back by Rishi Sunak. So I think that's partly, there's a lack of clear direction and long-termism.
So what needs to change then to make space a thriving industry for the UK?
Well, I think partly there's this longer term view. I think there are some wider problems which afflict British business beyond space. So in the piece, I talk about the British stock market. This is we're seeing this in semiconductors and chips with ARM choosing a New York listing over the UK. Likewise, the biggest British satellite companies have been effectively absorbed by an American company and a French company, respectively. And there's this kind of lack of ability to hold on to British tech champions, which perhaps is, it includes space as well. So these kind of capital market reforms, which the Treasury is working on, there's a lot of hope in government that will help address some of these problems. And then again, Brexit has led to a skills issue. The UK was excluded from big programs like there's one called Galileo, which, there was a British company which made the Galileo satellites. Now it can't. So there's lots of different parts to it. But I think it's kind of an interesting window into bigger challenges for the British economy.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.